was serving the nation since 1997, I think, in Congress. Before that, he was both a prosecutor and the youngest state senator in the country, I think, at some point.
Once upon a time. Yes.
Once upon a time. And he has been the leading Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, where he has done extraordinary good service for the security of the United States. Won't you join me in welcoming Congressman Smith? So let's start with the mainstream defense issues.
Yeah.
I see Mackenzie Eland, sharpshooter on defense budget, sitting in the front row. And she has done an enormous amount of good work. Our colleague Elaine McCusker has done the math to show that continuing resolutions cost DoD and lost purchasing power $300 million a day, and yet Congress had a continuing resolution running until recently. Why don't you share your perspective on the timeliness of good order in the Congress with us?
Sure. I mean, the first thing that I want to get at is the importance of us developing a strategy and understanding the world that we're in right now. And there's one key piece of that I think we're missing. We're beginning to wake up to the fact that there is a coordinated effort against U.S. and what is traditionally thought of as Western leadership. And that's Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and then various terrorist organizations, Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, that are basically trying to smash the post-World War II world order. And I already violated one of my own rules up front by saying the West. It's not really so much the West because, we work with Japan and South Korea and, Australia and a number of other different places to have put in place what has come to be referred to as the rules-based international order. And there is this now concerted effort to upset that. And we sort of look at each individual piece, obviously what Russia is doing in Ukraine, the threat that they pose in Eastern Europe, what they're doing in Africa, what they're doing in the Middle East, China's efforts, Iran, in the various destabilizing efforts that they're engaged in. And each one of those pieces has a slightly different set of issues attached to it. But overall, what they're doing very effectively is they're messaging against us. And we are not messaging back. Because a huge part of this fight is going to be the unaligned nations. If we're going to maintain our economic power, or if China is going to develop the ability to use economic coercion, India, Brazil, South Africa, Argentina, Saudi Arabia, UAE, these are going to be crucial players in that. And we have got to figure out how to message about the threat that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, I refer to them as the CRINGE. That's the acronym. It's the acronym that we came up with.
Fabulous.
China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and global extremism.
I love a good acronym.
But understand what I'm really trying to get at is on a day in and day out basis, they are online sending out messages to trash the U.S. and everything that we're in favor of. And they have a very clear, simple message that the rules-based international order is a fraud. It is something that the U.S. has simply used to dominate, exploit, and use other parts of the world. And we, the CRINGE, as I refer to them, are here to give you freedom from that order. And they drive that message on everything, on what's going on in Ukraine, on what's going on in Gaza, on what's happening with Taiwan. And we are not responding to that. And as a consequence, we are losing the PR war, and they're really smart about it. TikTok, obviously, is one big medium. That's what we want to get to. So that's the main thing I want to talk about. In terms of the answer to your question, look, yes, one of the challenges that we have is that we are a democracy, okay? That's also a benefit, I think, for reasons that we can get into. But in that situation, you have a lot of different people who have a voice in it. And I remember back in 2019 when I was trying to pass the defense bill my first year as chair, and when the Democrats were for the first time in the majority, and we were up against a Republican president and a Republican-controlled Senate, And we were trying to get the deal, and the various members of the press were, pushing me week after week. How come we're not there yet? How come we're not there yet? What's happening? And I finally said, look, democracy is a pain in the ass, okay? And what that means is, in order to accomplish things, you have to get agreement from a lot of different people. And if you got to get agreement from 2 people versus 100, 9 times out of 10, it's going to take more time to get the agreement from the 100. But we believe that you will come up with a better product and a better overall system. So yes, one of the things that happens in that is we do not pass things as quickly as we would like. You've done the calculation. You already know the cost. It is unquestionably costly to go past October 1st. Every day past October 1st is a problem. Every day past January 1st is a big problem. Now, if you want me to tell you, here's what we're going to do about it, I'm not going to. I just want to, agree with you and give a sense of urgency. But part of the reason that we don't have that sense of urgency is people haven't fully grasped that thing that I opened with. Yeah. We're all like fighting over this. There's this big, huge problem coming at us, okay? And squabbling over whether Marjorie Taylor Greene or Matt Gaetz gets to pick the speaker this week misses. Can we, maybe get together and focus on the threat that we're facing?
So let's talk about the threat then, because you were an early supporter of FISA legislation. Section 702 just repassed. How does the intelligence piece fit into understanding the threat and into how we need to shape this common American understanding? One of the things I really admire about your leadership as chairman of the Armed Services Committee when you were, and as ranking member, is the bipartisan nature of work in armed services that really doesn't exist in many other committees. What is it about armed services? Is it because you guys have a common view on the emergent threat, the CRINGE countries, as you call it? What creates that sense of cooperation?
Well, there's 3 different layers to your question. I'll try to hit them all. One, on the first part of the question, on the intelligence, obviously. The ability to access information and protect ourselves is enormously important, and it's now, 23 years since 9/11. I do not love everything that we did in response to 9/11. Sure. Certainly, the Iraq War, I think, was a mistake without question. But there's sort of this popular notion, and 702, I think, is a good example of, this, it's an invasion of privacy, and it isn't getting us anything anyway. And it's like, we haven't been attacked in the way we were.
That's a pretty big victory.
So connecting those dots and understanding how important it is to empower our country to adequately defend us, I think, is something that we take for granted at this point too often. Second, as far as the committee is concerned, it really is a culture. And I know culture has sort of become cliche these days, but culture matters. And when I came in '97, Ron Dellums was the ranking member, and Floyd Spence was the chair. And we've had a number of us since then. I could take time to count them up, but it wouldn't be important. And they ranged. Obviously, Ron Dellums, Floyd Spence. You had a wide range ideologically, but we have a culture on the committee that emphasizes a couple of things. One, we work in a bipartisan way. We have a bipartisan staff. I think we're the only committee in Congress that does. A lot of the people who worked for me when I was chair are working for Mike Rogers now when he's chair. And second, we know that our job is to get the bill done. Every year, 63 straight years now, we pass the defense bill. And that culture has been handed down, chair ranking, same's true in the Senate as well, that we work together because we got something to do. And I think that really matters, and I think that is instructive. And then the third layer to your question comes back to what I said at the top, is that sense of urgency. You can look at 702 and you can say, well, we'd rather not put random NSA people in the position to abuse that power. And I'm not going to deny that we put in new safeguards, there are accountability measures, that there is a risk that some random NSA person will do what some stories have shown, that they will do a search on their ex-girlfriend or whatever. All right, but we need to fire that person, we need to hold them accountable. But what's the cost of not taking that risk? Mm-hmm. The cost is the threat that we very clearly face from the CRINGE that I keep mentioning, and what they are trying to do. And I think we need to better understand that.
So going back to the CRINGE countries, our strategy has a tendency, our national security strategies have a tendency to focus on singular countries as threats. And one of the things that looks to me most concerning that as a consequence both of China's alienation by virtue of the choices they're making, right? They're activating the antibodies against their continued success, especially with their regional neighbors. And Russia, as a result of the isolation it brought on itself with the invasion of Ukraine, they have, in addition to their ideological discomfort with the existing order, now both have really pressing needs for deepening cooperation. What should we be looking for as leading indicators of deepening cooperation? And the North Korean artillery shells going to Russia seem to me one big one. China providing chips for Russian arms manufacturing. Where else should we be looking for the indicators?
At the moment, I'm not, there's a piece of it where we need to be concerned. The indicators are there. It's done, okay? Sitting there looking back at it and saying, gosh, are they really working together? How bad? No, they are working together, 100%. Okay, now there are limitations on that. Certainly one of the things we need to try to figure out is, China is providing considerable assistance to Russia right now in terms of dual use technology, certainly in terms of buying their oil and economic. They've not yet begun to directly transfer weapon systems, which would be an order of magnitude up. So yes, we need to say, okay, well, how do we reduce the possibility of that happening? But understand, you talked about how China has their limitations and challenges. They don't look at it that way right now. In fact, China and Russia, Iran, they're feeling pretty good about themselves. They're pretty confident that they are making progress in their mission to increase their influence in the world. And really what they want the freedom to be the totalitarian agents of coercion that they would like to be, and we stand in the way of that. Mm-hmm. They want to get us out. So that Iran can, get rid of Israel, so that they can control Iraq. China, so that they can spread their influence throughout Asia, not just Taiwan, but what they're doing with at least a half dozen or more countries in the region in terms of claiming the sovereign territory of other nations. Russia wants the greater Russian empire to the greatest extent possible, and they see us as an impediment to that. And part of the way they grow in their power is, again, the, if you will, non-aligned nations of the world. And you saw just recently that the BRICS countries have preliminarily invited Iran in, okay? So that's where we need to be worried about. And to do this effectively, we need to push back on the message of China, Russia, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Their message is that the U.S. is a bad, terrible actor, and they're gonna, violate your sovereignty and coerce, We need to point out what they're doing to try to convince, and we've had some progress in this. You saw Australia, was it 4 years ago now, maybe 3 years ago, when China reacted. Australia criticized China for, not being terribly transparent on COVID, which doesn't seem like a crazy, outlandish thing to say. China was not fond of that. And bam, they launched a full-scale economic war on Australia, which had a number of different effects, but the biggest one was Australia went, damn, we can't trust and work with these people. So they pivoted, they started looking at us. Japan similarly has seen the threat as China has grown. The Philippines. So China is pushing some countries into our arms. We need to be smarter about how we message, particularly in Latin America and Africa and Asia, to let the world know that this isn't just about us. This isn't side with us because we want to beat China. How is it better for them? They're not going to care. They don't care whether it's China, Russia, US, whoever. What's going to be best for them? And that's the case we have to make.
I really agree with you that we too often come stampeding in and say, we have a problem, you need to help us. When in fact, most countries with whom we have that conversation wish they had our problems instead of the problems they're having. So you have been a longtime advocate of foreign assistance reform. where does that fit into how we message America and the cultural West and how we engage other countries? What would you like to see us have the ability to do and actually do that we don't do currently in foreign assistance?
Well, one of the big things that we've done, and this was something that Ted Yoho and I worked on a few years ago, is to create an agency that allows U.S. foreign assistance to take an equity stake. And I always forget the name of it. I always want to say FDIC, and it's not. It's the Foreign Development something or another. I'm not great with acronyms. I think that's
CRINGE is really good.
Yeah, that's true. But that's one. I can remember one. It's when they come at me unexpectedly that it gets more challenging. So I think, being more aggressive, but again, it's about helping nations, foreign development, but also economic opportunity, helping them, grow their economy. And that's the competition that we're in right now that we need to more fully engage in. That's economically, and foreign aid is a key part of that. And I think the other, just two quick things. One is, I want to come back to the messaging piece. They are messaging the crap out of us right now. Everything that happens is our fault. Like the news yesterday, just on what happened in Gaza. And the news was initially reported, Hamas agreed to a ceasefire, Israel bombed Rafah. Okay, and that's what went out there all over the place. That's not what happened, okay? Hamas created their own ceasefire, which was Israel, you surrender, get out, we give you back a few dead bodies, and we call it good. And oh, by the way, then from Rafah, from a refugee camp, Hamas hit Israel, killed, I think, 4 soldiers and injured 6, and Israel responded to that. But who heard that message? And that's not an accident, okay? They are messaging aggressively to make everything look worse for us and our allies and everything look better for them. And there's people walking around the U.S. that are of the opinion that the U.S. is responsible for having started the Ukrainian war. And you can get into a fascinating argument about provocation and NATO and all these different things, but I'm still going to say that the guys who invaded and started bombing started the war.
Right.
But they're very aggressive about that piece. And the final thing I want to say on this that I think we need to correct, there is also a narrative now that is sort of the updated neocon way of looking at the world, where the key thing we have to do is we have to let everybody know we're going to defeat China. We're going to defeat Russia. We're going to defeat Iran. We need to stop pussyfooting around, sanction the hell out of them, spend another $1 trillion on defense, and let the world know that we will crush them. You can tell by the way I'm saying that I don't think that's the right message. It's ridiculously unrealistic, okay? We do not have the might economically or militarily to do that. China, Russia, Iran, these are not, weak nations that have no cards to play. All right, we got to be smarter about that. And second of all of those other nations that we are going to try so hard to persuade, they are going to recoil against that because the one thing they don't want is a global war. And if we look like we're the ones who are aggressively courting that, that's going to undermine our ability to deal with all of those other issues that we've talked about.
So I agree with that judgment, and it seems to me that an important criticism of the Biden administration's national security strategy is that they want to rebalance American power away from relying so heavily on military force, which is, of course, a good idea. And the countries, particularly the Asian countries, but almost all of America's friends, they don't want an ideological war, right? So they don't want us to cast it as authoritarianism versus the advance of democracy. They definitely don't want a war with China, because even if we would succeed, the amount of disruption is terrible for them as well as many others. What they want is an economic policy that allows both them and us to reduce our reliance on China. But that means we actually need a trade policy that allows market access and encourages cooperation, which the Biden administration's strategy averts its eyes from. And even,
to be fair, so did the Trump administration.
That's, I was headed to exactly that. That is, both parties appear hostile to that kind of economic engagement, even though the American public seems to favor it, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs has never had greater public support for that. Is there any way to rebuild either through one or both parties or through the work of Congress and more openness to foreign trade as a constituent part of our national security strategy?
Well, first of all, there is one good thing that both the Trump and the Biden administration have done, and that is we are shifting our reliance on China to other nations, okay? And that is, I believe, a positive. We became too dependent upon China and gave China too much power over us economically, which, as Australia learned and other countries learned, they were only too willing to use aggressively. And now we're seeing things, India's doing more, Malaysia's doing more, Mexico's doing more. And so I think we have had some success in saying we're not going to be as dependent on China. Now, China gets all kind of defensive about this, like we're waging an economic war on them. It's an economic competition. And we let China into PNTR, we let them steal our intellectual property for decades, and let them get this huge advance. So I see it as simply rebalancing that competition in a way that doesn't put us on our heels by spreading out who we're relying upon and making it more partners. But all of that ducks the essential question, okay? How do we do more on that front in terms of trade agreements, the Trans-Pacific Partnership? I have a long answer to this. I'll give you the shorter version of it. The biggest problem we have there is not political support in the United States. Back to we are a democracy, so therefore we have to live with the opinions. And, former President Trump recognized this. He was very aggressive on trade. Certainly he put tariffs on China, but he put tariffs on Canada. He put tariffs on Europe. He got very aggressive in the trade war because that was something that economically working class people in America felt that we had been forced into a situation where we were in unfair competition with other countries and it was costing us jobs and really causing problems. And they're not wrong about this. My answer is always the same, which may not be popular in this particular setting, but companies need to take care of workers in the US. When you look at the last 50 years, we've had a massive increase in wealth in this country. It's not a situation where, we've stopped growing and so we're in some sort of spiral. No, it's just that wealth has gone to a very small group of people. Why? Because we have prioritized shareholders and investors over workers, far more than we ever have. The wealth is going there. It's not going to working people. Companies come to me all the time and say, what can we do to get America to get Congress to be more supportive of trade? I always give the same answer. Take care of your workers, all right? Because the second that the employees at Boeing think that a trade agreement is as good for them as it is for their executives, is the second they're all in favor of it and the second we vote for it. And I grew up a lot of people who work for Boeing. Good friend of mine has been at Boeing for 30 years. By the way, it's scary. It used to be when I said that, it would be a good friend of mine's father was at Boeing for 30 years. I'm getting old, is the point. But, and he's pissed at the company, and for a whole bunch of different reasons. But one big one, I forget when it was, 10 years ago, some amount of time ago, in the same month that they slashed the pensions for all of their employees dramatically, they did something like a $50 billion stock buyback.
Yeah.
And they let the workers know, screw you. We're taking your money and we're giving it to these people who already have enough. So economic populism to me is how do we pay workers for the work they do? And I'm sorry, I got one more example I got to throw at you.
Go ahead.
I've pissed off Boeing, so now I have to piss off Amazon. It's the way it works in Seattle. And don't get me wrong, Amazon is I think used as a punching bag way too much. And they do some very positive things. But in my district, there is a fulfillment center. I've worked in warehouses. It's a warehouse. But anyway, they call it a fulfillment center because apparently that makes everybody feel better about the experience. And at that fulfillment center, they start off paying people $16 an hour. Yeah, that's pretty good. Except you can't live on $16 an hour in Kent because a one-bedroom apartment goes for about $2,000 a month, all right? You can't. All right. Now, when I started working for minimum wage, I was making $3.35 an hour. If you told me back
You are old.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. If you told me back in 1984 that they were going to pay me $16 an hour, I would have thought I'd died and gone to heaven. But now the costs have gone up so much, And here's the thing, Amazon, they're a $3 trillion company yet, depends on the day. $2 trillion, $3 trillion, something. A $3 trillion company, nobody should be working for that company who isn't paid enough to pay their bills.
Okay.
Nobody, okay? So if we don't address that, we're not going to be able to open up trade.
So I want to pull you back to the gap between strategy, threats, and government tools for handling it, and in particular, the defense budget. So do you think, I mean, I have the sense that that the Congress, on a bipartisan basis, thinks that the defense budget is inadequate for the strategy. Because you added, McKinsey, keep me honest on the math, what, $25 billion 2 years ago, $47 billion a year ago. What's the right answer to that? How do we close the gap between the threats you outlined, our strategy for managing them, and the resources we are putting towards it?
You ask really good, complicated questions, which takes me a minute to answer. So I'm going to start here by saying, think about it this way. You just said that the resources for defense are inadequate to the need. What portion of the current U.S. budget would you say is adequate to the need? Okay? We're short on healthcare, we're short on education, we're short on infrastructure, water, sewer, roads, bridges, airports, you name it. Okay, I'm talking with teachers all day long. We said we were going to pay 40% of the cost of IDEA. We're paying 12. Okay, so we're 28% short of where we need to be on that. Medicare doesn't cover dental, eye care, or hearing. Okay, there is no portion of our budget that I have anyone who would come up and say we're good. Okay, number one. Number two, people aren't terribly excited about paying more taxes. We can get a more complicated discussion about that, so more revenue's off the table. Three, everyone is deeply concerned about the fact that our deficit is too high. Okay, so yeah, you pick one piece out of that equation and go, okay, let's just look at this. Oh my God, we gotta spend more money. But when you look at the whole equation, all right, I am done going, oh my God, the only way we can survive is to spend another $100 billion on defense. And I'm done with that because we don't really have the money. Now, I get that once you're $1 trillion, or once you're $33 trillion in debt, what's 40? Or 45? Or what the hell, okay? I just have a feeling that it's a problem, all right? And we got to figure out some way to live within that. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is we spend a lot of money. I mean, $900 billion is roughly the proposal this year on defense. You're telling me we can't adequately defend this country for $900 billion? How dumb are we? Okay, I mean, that's a variation on a quote I like to use from Winston Churchill where, gentlemen, we're out of money, now we have to think. Okay, so I am not focused on, we gotta get 50 billion more. See, I'm focused on what are we doing with the money we have? A. B, how can we leverage that by using partners and allies and get creative about the support that we have? I mean, you got to play the cards you're dealt. And it's sort of a similar opinion I have with what I said earlier about would I like a world where China just calmed down, and sure, all right? We don't live in that world. And huffing and puffing isn't going to make us live in that world. We got to deal with what we've got. And that's what we've got. How do we make that budget work to meet our needs? And I believe that we can.
So you say we can't afford more defense spending, but historically, as a proportion of the American GDP...
Whose taxes do you want to raise? What budget do you want to cut? Or how much higher do you want the deficit to be?
So I would cut a fair number of things, and I would probably start with eliminating from the defense budget some of the $107 billion.
You're talking about within the defense budget, sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Elaine McCusker from AEI has...
I'm sorry, I cut you off. Where were you going with
done
that?
a terrific
The
study.
$100 billion is coming from where?
$107 billion in the defense budget that is unrelated to fighting and winning wars, recruiting and keeping the people in the force you want.
I would love to see what those numbers are.
Great. Yeah. We will get them.
Because that's what I think we need to do.
It seems to me that there's an enormous amount of trade space within the budget that we have allowed because the NDAA always passes, because of the culture that you described. things, as of course you know so much better than I, get put in there that because it's going to pass.
I can correct you on one key point.
Go.
It's little known fact, we don't spend any money in the NDAA.
Fair.
We don't. We got all those tables, we got all those things everywhere, but it's the appropriators who spend money.
Fair point.
So, whatever's in our bill doesn't actually ultimately affect that. We can obviously restrict some things, but ultimately it's more in the appropriators.
So I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to ask our audience to gear up. Even I see people like Dan Galliano who are here present and are sending questions online, so you're going to have to ask it yourself. But before we get to that, you are one of the bipartisan signatories of a letter about submarines. It seems to me self-serving that the Pentagon's answer to the demand for submarines exceeding the cost that they would ascribe to submarine production, exceeding what they feel they have, and DoD's description of why they have reduced the number of submarines to be bought in the budget is that industry just can't produce them, so we're going to eliminate the gap between what we are pretending industry could produce. And it seems to me a better solution to that problem is sending a consistent demand signal of long-term contracts for the things that are most important in the budget.
On this, we agree. That is one key part of it, one key thing that we need to change.
Please give sail to your argument about this.
Well, I think you did. I mean, you made the argument as well as I can make it. I think if you give a long-term demand signal, that gets you better to the capacity to where you need. Involved in that is making choices in the short term. And I think, our opinion is, attack submarines are really important to our national defense. And I think we have to start making, better choices across the board about where to send those demand signals and making decisions more quickly, which gets me into a long answer about the culture at the Pentagon, the culture in Congress, which you've given many times, both of which undermine our ability to make those types of investment. We need to change both of those cultures to enable us to make better, more long-term and quicker procurement decisions. I don't know about long-term, but certainly, send the right demand signal and make some of the correct choices on, where we need to be headed.
So we have about 15 minutes left. I'm glad to field questions. Mackenzie, I'm going to give you the first shot if you have one, since this is your wheelhouse. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, sir. Thank you for being here. Mackenzie Eaglin, AEI.
Good to see you.
It's always a pleasure to have you back here. So many different questions, but I guess I would start with my most recent report trying to take publicly available information to assess Beijing's real military spending, which of course their self-reported number through state media is $229 billion. And AEI, we crunched the numbers ourselves with all the caveats that you would put on that type of work and assess it to be over $700 billion for 2022, and that's about what we spent that year. And of course, they only have to spend it in a much smaller, more targeted and limited objective neighborhood called South China Sea and the Indo-Pacific. Is this something
Although they are looking to expand in certain areas.
And they are expanding, absolutely, their global presence. Is this something that you're thinking about in addressing in this year's defense authorization bill, getting more data from the intelligence community, who of course was the original source of a $700 billion figure for Beijing's real military spending, and the discrepancy between what Beijing says they spend and how much they actually spend?
Yes, and this it's into what my central message is here. And there's 1,000 different things we're talking about, but my central message here is we are not messaging this conflict correctly, okay? And that's it. The report comes out and they go, oh my gosh, here's how much money the world spent on military, and the U.S. is spending half of it. We got to be out instantly and say, that is simply not correct. China does not report transparently. Here's what they're really spending. And send the number out there and let the world know this is what China's really doing. So yes, that's a great example of China's, and they're very aggressive about their messaging. And they are a dictatorship, so they are able to control their message. You don't have a Chinese member of whatever their elected body is going, well, let me just tell you, here's what's wrong with what President Xi is saying. They don't have to deal with that, okay? And certainly that is an advantage of a dictatorship. The disadvantage is, the corruption, the repression, and it's hurting their economy. And they are not innovating as quickly as they should because innovators are going, I could wind up in jail tomorrow if I say the wrong thing, so I'm out of here. So don't get me wrong, I'm very much in favor of the representative democracy model for the way to lead, but we got a message, and we're not messaging. And that would be one example of where we could very aggressively get out there in space and counter that narrative.
Dan.
Good to get called out. Hi, my name's Dan Gagliano. I sent in a question, and you started talking about how big the budget should be. And it seems to always grow to some extent. But how do you propose then dealing with legacy systems and balancing out modernization in the budget? Does this require, and you've already kind of answered this, a $1 trillion budget for the Defense Department?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm kind of weird when it comes to budgets. Like I said, just tell me, put the cards on the table, tell me what they are, and let's play. Okay? It's always, okay. I grew up relatively poor. My first campaign, nobody thought I could win. I didn't have any money. I had to figure out how to win without it, okay? So just mentally, that's the way I think. These are the resources in front of me. Let's make it work. And I think we would all benefit from shifting our thinking a little bit in that direction. Because again, we have a lot of resources out there. But yes, I think legacy systems are a crucial part of it. And this is where Congress is a problem. We advocate for the systems closest to our district too often. One thing Mike Rogers and I have in common, by the way, we don't, okay? And here's the thing. He's from Alabama, I'm from Washington State. There's a fair amount of defense dollars that are going to wind up in both places, okay? I'm not really excessively worried about that, all right? I'm not going to advocate for a system that isn't adequate for our national needs just because it happens to be in my district. One of the very first votes I took in Congress was to not build, 20 more B-2 bombers, The wings were made in my district at the time, and as my MLA pointed out, the whole thing's nothing but wing. So it's all built here. I just didn't think it was a good investment of the money. So we've got to make that pivot, and legacy systems are one of the biggest problems. And what you've got to look at is, what is the cost to operate that thing, okay? And then what benefit is it bringing us? And, people, and look, it's not always an easy question. People talk about, aircraft carriers and how vulnerable they are if we got into a fight with China, so why are we even making them? I'll tell you what, those two aircraft carrier battle groups have been enormously helpful in the Middle East over the course of the last 6 months. They have been a major deterrent to what Iran and Hezbollah could have done. So it is frequently a more complicated question than that. But, the cruisers drove me a little bit insane. We spent an enormous amount of money just trying to get those damn things to float, okay? We spent all this money, we sent it out, shit, it's not working. Yeah, bring it back. It's like, you gotta look at what is the sustainment cost? What are we getting for this? And we gotta do that more aggressively, more effectively, and getting rid of legacy systems is important. Now, like I said, you gotta make a decision. What is a legacy system? What is actually helping us? What isn't? But those types of decisions need to be made, which is why Chairman Rogers and I are so focused on how can we get the Pentagon to move more quickly and innovate more quickly and make decisions more quickly. When it comes to drone defense, there are some technologies that are definitely more promising than others. I'll go out on a limb here, and I don't know who I'm offending by saying this. Lasers, that type of directed energy, is probably not going to work. Now, there's other directed energy that's apparently microwave technology, and at this point I'm way over my head. But the basic laser beam, to be able to concentrate it really hard, and also it doesn't have much range. And oh, by the way, if it's raining or if there's a dust storm, it might not work. And furthermore, if they start putting stuff around the missiles that's tougher to burn through, so let's just make a decision. Yeah, no, that's not working. This is working. Let's go with that. We need to enable quicker decisions about those innovative things. But yes, legacy systems are part of the problem.
I think that's a really important point about speed of decision. Yeah, right here.
My name is Sang-Bin Lee. I'm a reporter from Radio Free Asia. I have two questions about North Korea, one of the CRINGE you referred to. So there has been constantly increasing military cooperation between Russia and North Korea. So how do you think United States react this issue? And second question is, it is known that AUKUS, UK, US, Australia, considering that South Korea joining AUKUS Pillar 2. So do you support that South Korea join AUKUS Pillar 2?
Yeah, no, I think you answered your own question. I mean, the way we respond to that is we strengthen our own alliances and partnerships. You know, we're not really in a position to stop North Korea from doing what they're doing. We have got to strengthen our partnerships in the region so that we can better counter that. And I think, you know, we've actually made a lot of progress on that, which is, by the way, one of the things that worries me about Donald Trump's approach to the issue is he seems to have a reflexive distaste for alliances and partnerships. You know, South Korea, we were in all kinds of trouble on updating the status of forces agreement because he kept trying to force South Korea to pay more money for when we were there, not recognizing the benefit of that alliance. I mean, I think his approach to contracts is basically, you know, I'm trying to think of what the phrase I want to use here, something along the lines of what's mine is mine, what's yours is negotiable. And that's always sort of been his approach in business. But it can be really dangerous in terms of alienating partners that we need right now. And South Korea, absolutely a partner that we need. And I think President Biden, you know, gotten criticisms on a whole lot of things. When you look at how he has strengthened the partnership, what he's done to kind of get Japan and South Korea closer together, you know, bringing the Quad together, the AUKUS agreement. And one final point about the AUKUS agreement, the beauty of that, it's not just about submarines. It's about cooperative production. Australia is getting ready to start making some Gimlers for us, okay? When you think about how do we get to those production numbers, it's going to be with partners. So we need to build and strengthen those partnerships wherever we can.
So we have a slew of hands up for remaining questions. What I suggest we do in our remaining 7 minutes is let the 1, 2, 3, 4 quickly ask one question, and then you can answer whichever one of them you have time for.
I will do my best
so
to
let's
cover
start
all that.
here. Please be brief so others can have an in.
Hi, I'm Ken Moriyasu from Nikkei Asia. Last week in one of the hearings, you talking about the shipyard workforce. You talked about possibly using immigrants. Do you want to elaborate on that? And if that is not possible, is using foreign shipyards like in Japan and South Korea to actually build ships, is that in the options too? Thank you.
Great. Right behind you, the young man in the blue shirt.
Hi, my name's Cameron. I'm an RA for our Coalition Defense of Taiwan project. So given the resource constraints you mentioned that we can't raise taxes, we can't cut programs, you do mention that we should adjust our spending to make our dollar go further. But if these resource constraints are as strong as you say, at what point do we start adjusting our goals downward to meet our resources?
Smart question. Against the wall. And then the last one over there.
My name is Owen. I'm a student at American University. My question kind of relates to politics a little bit more. I saw throughout the talk that there's a disconnect between public opinion and what we actually need when it comes to the conflict in Gaza. What would you tell college students that are either for or against it? What do you think they should know?
Excellent question. And then last right here. I'm sorry, I know there are other people with hands up that I don't have a chance to get to.
Congressman John Rosmando with Newsmax. My question for you is, you know, the Chinese Navy is growing by leaps and bounds, and as the gentleman was talking about, we seem to have problems with having adequate shipyard for maintenance, and we've had a series of procurement.
Briefly, please.
Okay. So what does the United States do to counter the growth of the Chinese Navy?
Sure.
Excellent.
So let me start. So I start with the budget question. We are not in a scarce resource situation, okay? We have what? Was it? Is it six? I think we have a $6 trillion budget, okay? Dwarfing any other budget in the world, okay? Number one. Number two, I'm not saying we shouldn't cut programs. Okay, yeah, I mean, to your point, you identified some things. Within that budget, what I'm saying is that we don't, just throw another $100 billion in there and we'll be fine. No, I'm saying, look at the resources we've got and let's make the most of what we've got. And I always draw like campaign analogies, but, you know, in that first campaign, I didn't have a lot of money, so what's important? what are you really trying to do here? What really matters? And in a campaign, what you're trying to do is you're trying to deliver a message to a certain audience through whatever medium they're going to get to. So what I've come to say is when I'm putting together a campaign budget, every single dollar in my campaign budget that doesn't go to message delivery physically pains me, okay? Now, I know you got to do it. You know, you got to pay consultants. I'm not paying someone $4,000 a month to give me advice, okay? You know, what are you really getting out of that dollar that you're spending? You know, what is the return? How is it helping you achieve your mission? That's what we need to do. You can't look at the United States of America and say we've got scarce resources. Oh my God, plus we got the private sector. You know, back to your question about foreign development assistance. We got the Gates Foundation and all this. So why can't we leverage the resources that are out there available to achieve our objective? That's what I'm trying to get at. The thing about Gaza is like it's a religious thing past a certain point, and I've had these conversations. You know, the two big points that I try to make is that what Israel is facing is an existential threat. Hamas, and quite frankly, most of the supporters of the Palestinians feel like Israel should have never been created in the first place. It is deemed to be a settler colonial state that is an occupier on other people's land. And we can get into a really complicated argument. I read this book, Palestine 1936, which I highly recommend, which talks about how we got to that point. But however we got to that point, whether Israel should have been created in the first place or not, they're there. They've been there for 75 years. And if you want peace, your position can't be one side of the conflict has to go away, because they're going to fight in that situation, whether we give them anything or not, okay? So the nature of the existential threat to Israel coming from Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran is profound, okay? And we want peace on that part. And the second part of it is still underreported the degree to which Hamas uses civilians as shields and uses it. And that, you know, when you look at what Israel is doing and how can you possibly justify it, you have to look at it from the standpoint of facing an enemy that is launching rockets out of them out of hospital parking lots, okay, or from tunnels underneath them. All of that said, because I know people are watching this, I have to balance this out, and I do believe this, Netanyahu was fundamentally wrong on the single biggest question that he faced. He felt Israel cannot be safe if there's a Palestinian state, when in fact the opposite was true, okay? And all that Israel has done under Netanyahu to make it impossible for a legitimate Palestinian state to emerge and to move into the areas of the West Bank that are not part of Israel has also undermined it. And we want to push back against that and get to a legitimate two-state solution. That's what we're trying to do. On the shipbuilding questions, a couple of different pieces to it. Yes, I think immigration could be crucial. And this is one of the great public policy frustrations of the current moment. We have a massive migration crisis, okay? We are overwhelmed with the sheer volume of people who are coming at our borders. Now, comprehensive immigration reform could help with that. So we have that. At the same time, we have this massive workforce shortage in a whole bunch of different places. I'm like, what could we possibly do here that might help address those two issues? You know, we could issue some work visas and we could bring some people in and train them to work in a variety of different areas. And by the way, the defense industrial base and shipbuilding, pretty good place to start, because there's a huge need, and that's part of the reason that we're falling behind. The overseas shipyards are a problem. We want to maintain our shipbuilding capacity, and we still have yards in this country that would like more work. So I would like to see us, and I know Rahm Emanuel's a good friend, he is very focused on getting more work into the Japanese shipyards, and he has a very logical argument about it. Politics are difficult. I think we need to look for ways to, just like with AUKUS, you know, we're making gimbalers in Australia, got a Turkish company that's making 155 in Texas, which they're going to be doing. We need to look for ways to expand it in that way. And to answer the last question about, you know, how do we compete? That's really a very similar question. You know, we need to increase the defense industrial base and our capacity to make ships, but also, and I've said this many, many times, I think in this place before, the obsession with the number of ships is idiotic. I mean, you could have 5,000 rowboats. Would you have a better Navy than someone with 100 destroyers? I don't think so. Let's focus on capability, which is why the submarines are so important. They're really capable. So that's how I think we need to counter that. But more than anything, we have to be creative. Warfare in this age is changing constantly. What gives us the advantage to deter our adversaries? Frankly, right now, increased drone and missile defense and drone defense capability, if you get there first on those things, it's going to give you an enormous deterrent capability. So I think we need to be smart about those things.
My friends, won't you join me in thanking this great public servant, Congressman Adam Smith?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.